Alrighty, and we're on.
Hey, Johnny.
Hell yeah. So I'm sitting here with Kieren Lefevre. What is the
perfect.
Lefevre?
Lefevre, yeah.
Lefevre, okay.
Yeah.
And so how we sort of connected was, I think you've been doing some filming or videography for some other people that, we've got some common friends, I guess. So Jeremy as an example.
Yeah, Jeremy Skinner.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I also checked out, you're on a podcast and I can't remember who it was with, but you were talking about health and nutrition and that side of things. And I listened to that and I was like, oh, this is an interesting guy. And then I think I saw a few of your other things pop up on Instagram. So I think you're involved with Ground 9 Productions?
Yes, Ground 9 Productions is my main videography company that focuses around jiu-jitsu. So that's sort of where our worlds sort of mix. And the podcast you're talking about is Jungle Brothers podcast.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah. And so then I know you also started a jiu-jitsu oriented podcast.
Yes. Yep. Yes. Beyond Jiu-Jitsu with Adam Childs, my coach.
Yep. And so then I was like, I've got to get Kieren on the podcast. So we were trying to tee it up last year, and then obviously there was a lot of stuff happening with COVID and everything else, so that sort of delayed things.
Yeah, this has been like a couple month journey now, hasn't it?
Yeah. Don't worry. It took me and Jeremy to probably a year and a bit to actually get together.
Oh wow!
And a lot of the times it's funny. So what I've got is I've got this list on a notebook where I've written down all the people that I want to get on the show. And so it's like, I sort of, maybe I treat it a bit like fishing, right? So it's like, I throw it out there and then I work out who's biting. And then so then I try and book so I try and do 2 a week and I book out, sort of like a month in advance. And so what I do is every time it comes around time to book again, then I'll just go through the list again and go
fishing.
Yeah. And basically go fishing and go, okay, I still haven't had this person and this person and this person and this person. And then, just throw it out there and see what timing works. That's sort of how I do it. But I guess when it comes, so with you and Adam, do you guys, how do you schedule your guests? And
man, we are so ad hoc. We are nowhere near as organized because our podcast is pretty much revolved around us talking shit. We basically pick topics months in advance around jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
We have a big spreadsheet where we go through and say, okay, let's address this. What's trending? If anything happens, like any news related controversy or whatever, we try and just insert it. But in terms of bringing on guests, it's very ad hoc. Okay. We basically say, we haven't had a guest in a while. Let's bring one on.
Okay.
So our first guest wasn't until episode 37 or something like that. Somewhere around there was our first guest. So the podcast is very much centered around just a bit of banter, a bit of juxtaposing a black belt and at the time a white belt when we started it and seeing, where things align. I bring the nutrition and what have you. So yeah, we are very, very ad hoc.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Do it, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's funny because sometimes when I go through the list and I message a few of the people when I'm starting to book the next one, they go, why are you so organized?
Yeah.
And it's it's actually just because I'm really time poor. Before I was working full time. I'm not working full time anymore. But 3 kids, training. I train in basically 3 different places.
Wow.
So because I do my jiu-jitsu at Integrated Combat Center, I do my Muay Thai at Janaksu Muay Thai Gym, and then I've been doing a bit of MMA with the MMA Family Fight team, who are also they go to grappling education and train there as well.
Oh, nice.
And a few of the other places at UFC Rockdale. With
is that where you originally connected with Jeremy? At grappling education?
No.
Okay.
So I competed against Jeremy years ago at a grappling industry. So what happened?
I think I remember that. I listened to your podcast. That's right. Yeah.
So we actually competed against each other. So what actually happened? So I wasn't actually training grappling formally. When I say training grappling formally, so what happened was I was it would have been around the time when I started at Mercedes-Benz in Wollongong. So I was running a dealership down in Wollongong, and that would have been end of 2014. I would have started there.
Right.
And then what it was so I've been training Kung Fu for most of my life. And then I was looking for somewhere to train in the mornings, right? And so I thought I'll try, go to Anytime Fitness, and there's nothing happening. It's boring, right? If you're there by yourself, because basically I just wanted to beat the traffic. So I would get up in the morning at 6 o'clock, jump straight in the car, have all my gear in the car, and then go to a gym and train, and then have a shower and then go to work. And so then I found an MMA gym down there, Full Circle Mixed Martial Arts, and the coach there was Russell Thompson. And I connected with Russ, and Russ was really good. He had quite a few guys that were fighting in MMA and things like that. And I wanted to work on the grappling side of it, because what had happened for me was I'd competed in some pancration comps years before, and the part that let me down was my ground game. So I connected with Russ, and he helped me with my wrestling and my jits a bit, but it was all no-gi MMA oriented grappling. And so after doing that for a few years, one of my other mates who trains at VT1, Dexter, he's a brown belt there now, and he was going to compete at Grappling Industries as well. So then he was like, "Oh, I'm going to go do grappling. Like, do you want to come?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, if you're going to compete, I'll compete." You know, because we'd grappled before, and you know, it was always interesting because I'd come up with like weird ways like that are not really, I guess, down the jiu-jitsu pathway because of, you know, you're basically bringing other concepts in to try and attack or address the problem. And so we both entered, and then he was like, because he'd already been training for a few years then, so I think the rules back then said like, you know, if you'd been training 3 years or more, you should go in the advanced category. And so then we both jumped in the advanced, and Jeremy was there, and Jeremy cleaned us out. So I think in that comp I came third. I think, yeah, I came third that time, and then I think the second time I competed. I think I competed against Jeremy maybe 2 or 3 times, but the second time I did atrociously. I don't think Dexter was there for that one, and then I competed a couple more times in the advanced no-gi at grappling, and you know, got a silver and something else. And
nice.
Yeah, and then but anyway, so it was after competing with him, like we sort of just started talking, and then we, you know, added each other on Instagram and just sort of kept in contact. And then, you know, he started to really take off, you know, after going to Absolute and getting into it full time, and then getting the opportunity to compete internationally. You know, that sort of saw his, I guess, spotlight sort of grow. And so I just kept in contact with him, and I just said, look, you know, I've started a podcast, you know, do you want to come on? And he was like, yeah. And then it was just trying to organize the time was just the hard part because, you know, back then he was in Melbourne, and then he's come up to Sydney, and then COVID, and then COVID, and then COVID. and then we finally got together and got it done. So, you know, I guess the thing about my podcast, it's sort of probably very different to most of the other podcasts he's probably gone on, because most of those would be very jiu-jitsu oriented. Mine's very much more about life and how you get to that level.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's how he and I connected. And then obviously, you know, I was watching, you know, some of the videos that you were doing and his instructionals and things like that. And I was like, oh, you know, I connected with you. And I was like, okay, I want to know more, because obviously, you know, when you're doing these sorts of things, you've probably picked up some things. And we were just talking about gear just before.
Yeah, right? And we went on a bit of a nerd rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because everybody's got an opinion on it. And it's always good to learn from everyone, and then take away, okay, well, what do I need to have, and what works and what doesn't work, and those sorts of things. But I think we should pull it all the way back first.
Yeah.
Right? So, because I always like to go back to the beginning, and when I say that, so you know, where did you grow up, and what do you remember about childhood?
Man, okay. There's a loaded question. So I grew up and down the east coast of Australia.
Yep.
And I say up and down because I moved around a lot, but mainly in New South Wales.
Okay.
The furthest north we went was Tweed Heads.
Okay.
And I went to school in like Queensland. That was around the age of 8 or so.
Yep.
But I suppose when people ask me where I grew up, I just say Newcastle, because that's where I graduated high school.
Okay.
And spent the last 4 years of high school in around Newcastle. So I just for convenience I say Newey.
Yep. What was the reason for the moves? So I guess
so my mum didn't really have any particular one job that kept her in one place. She was the type of person that I don't know what it is. I think every couple of years she just wanted, or even every year or so, she wanted just to move to be in a new environment. You know, I'm not quite sure what it is. And I've asked her, you know, in adult life, hey, you know, why do we always move? And she doesn't really have a reason.
Yep.
I think it's just in her personality, and took her kids along with the ride. The fact that we moved around a lot created some issues, but also some strengths.
Okay.
Issues would be you know, going to new schools all the time and always meeting new people. So you never really have that one core group of friends. You know, I meet people and they've had the same friends since they were you know, in primary school together. I didn't really have that.
Yep.
But on the flip side, because I went to so many different environments and so many different schools, I got very good at making friends quickly.
Yep.
You know, I think some kids in that situation become the very shy, introverted person, where others that are more extroverted will excel, and that will bring out those personality traits more. And that was me.
Yep.
And my brother was the opposite. He was the introvert.
Yep.
So
was he older or younger?
He's older.
He's older. Okay.
So I'm the youngest of 5 kids.
5 kids.
Yeah, 3 half sisters, different dad, and one brother who we grew up together. But my youngest sister is more than 10 years older than me. So there's a big age gap between me and my sister. She's like 11 years older than me, and my eldest sister is like 15 or so years older than me.
Okay.
So they're like, approaching their 40s now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then, I've got a few questions on that, right? So, okay, with the blended family, like, what do you remember about that? Was that difficult? Was that something?
Well,
was it a bit of adjustment, or like what? I guess how did that come about?
So my sisters, from the earliest age that I can remember, they never lived with us. They moved out very young.
Okay.
I think my sisters moved out of home around like that 16, 17, 18 mark.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I don't really remember them ever living with us.
Yep.
Obviously, they were around.
Yep.
We've always been close, proximity,
Yep.
Lived close to them. But, yeah, it was just basically me and my brother. And then I had older sisters that lived out of home. And they more acted like, sometimes like a second mum in a sense, or like an auntie. They're obviously still my sisters, but just older. So normally they're babysitting and they had kids very young themselves.
Yep.
So like my nephew, my oldest nephew is 2 years younger than me.
Okay.
So I was an uncle when I was 2. And that's like, that highlights the age gap between us. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic, but yeah. So pretty much I grew up with my brother and my sisters were out of home. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find that sort of dynamic interesting, especially like when people have like, so I got an age gap with my brother of 7 years.
Right.
And so his kids, Kayla would be in her teens now because she's in high school. And it's, I always think it's, like compared to my kids, they're like almost 10 years older, right? And so, you're always going to have that. It's going to be interesting as they get older, right? Like if, as an example, whether they have kids early or late will then determine where the nephews and nieces are relative to that. And it's
exactly.
just, so you could probably almost come down like generations and realize that, you're like that old, the joke about you being your own grandma type thing. It's like, wait, you're my great grand uncle and you're only like 5 years older than me?
Well, I am a grand uncle at this point. So one of my nieces and one of my nephews now have kids, and I don't even have kids yet. it's like, I'm a great uncle at the age of 26. Yeah. So it's quite funny.
So from a schooling perspective, right? Do you remember much about the schools that you went to when you were young?
Some of them I remember. It's funny. Some of them I remember more than others, and the ones that I remember the most are the ones I spent the least time at.
Okay.
Which is, I don't know why. It's very weird. So I remember one school, and I'm talking like younger than 12-ish. Because I went to, I once counted, and I think it was nearly 15 different primary schools.
Wow.
Which is so many, like too many, right? That's a very short schooling period, and to go to so many schools. High schools, not so much. It was only 4. But that's a lot of schools, nearly 20 all up. And I remember some of the primary schools, one of them that I was at for the least amount of time was 1 term. I was at a school for a term and then moved again.
Wow.
Because, I don't know, we moved somewhere that my mum didn't like the area and just wanted to get out, or what have I honestly don't remember. It was so long ago. But yeah, it's quite interesting. So one thing I found, and the one thing I remember the most about going to so many different primary schools, is the curriculums were all different in terms of when they did what in a year. Obviously, they're all following the same New South Wales curriculum. Yeah, exactly. But when they decided to teach a certain aspect of that curriculum would change. So what happened a lot is I'd go to one school for a term, learn one concept, go to the other school, they're just starting the same concept. But in that previous term that I missed out on, they did something I hadn't covered. So my primary school schooling was very disrupted, and it made education incredibly difficult. So I struggled a lot in primary school. And so much so that at some schools I was put in like that special education program with additional help where, those kids would leave the classroom and go with the teacher that came in, 3 times a week or whatever. I was in those classes for a couple of primary schools because I was so far behind. And it wasn't until high school that, I don't know, it's weird. It's like something clicked overnight, and I was like, nah, I don't know. It just, once I hit high school, I started to excel, and that's when I was in the top of my grade. So it's so contrasting that in primary school I was at the bottom of the grade, and in high school, just for whatever reason, because I had more stability or different format, it just excelled. So it's really weird.
Did you find that having gone to so many different schools in primary school, did that sort of turn you off education? Like, were you a bit like, so you're like, I don't really want to go to school?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was so jack of it. Like, I remember thinking all the way through high school and even primary how much I didn't want to be there. I was like, you hear it all the time, particularly with entrepreneurial types. They say how like school wasn't for them, and that was me in a nutshell. Like school was not for me. Even when I was doing well, like I was not doing well socially. Like I would act out in other ways, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. And I think I never actually associate it with moving around a lot, but I think you're onto something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then from a social perspective, right? Like you meeting so many different people over such a short period of time, it's probably pretty hard to establish connections, right?
Oh yeah. Like I'm not in contact with any of them, because like different schools you go to, you get like a best friend there and you hang out with your core group of friends. But because this was predating social media, or at least the prevalence of social media,
you can't keep in contact with them.
No contact, like at all. So I don't have contact with anyone I went to primary school with, only high school. And that was the high school that I graduated from. And that's the longest I've ever spent at one school, which was very fortunate that my mum, took us to put me in one high school toward the end. That was nice of her. But yeah.
So, okay. So with that, like I just want to talk about that flipping of the switch where you started to do quite well academically. Right. Was there something that made you like? Did you suddenly want to study more, or was there? What do you think that could have
I don't even know. I wasn't even studying that much. I didn't really do my homework. So I don't know what it is. Honestly, I remember very clearly it just happened in high school from about grade 7 or 8 toward the end of 7 and start of 8. And I don't know, a light bulb just went off. So I went to boarding school as well for about 18 months. And that, I think maybe it was there because I was forced to study where, things just went really well for me academically. And I very quickly catapulted to the higher classes. I was in, I forget what the term they use, but like the A English, A math, or whatever. Whatever it is, like the ranking system. But I think it probably was around that boarding school time that it really, like the light really got switched on.
Yep. And what do you remember about that experience at boarding school?
Terrible. Horrible. Like I hated it with a passion, because it wasn't like, my family didn't grow up we didn't have a lot of money. So it wasn't, and I had to go to boarding school out of necessity from a family home situation that was happening at the time.
Wow.
So I sort of was the naughty boy that got shipped off to boarding school, like quite literally.
Yep.
And it wasn't in Sydney. The boarding school was in Bathurst, because it was, rural, country, cheaper, right? We couldn't afford to go to Knox or any of those, crazy expensive schools. So I went to a boarding school out in Bathurst called St. Stanislaus College, or Stannies.
Yeah.
And it was in that environment that you had to study every night. You had to be in a classroom for X amount of hours with a teacher, depending on what grade you're in.
Yep.
So I was in like a classroom before dinner. We had dinner, and then back in the classroom for another like 45 minutes, an hour, and then, free time after that. So there was a forced study of like 2.5 hours after school every day.
Yep.
So that is where, my grades, if you will, really
took up,
shot off. And then I just maintained it to a certain extent. Yep. And
So when you got out of boarding school per se, like
so different, because it was an all boys school as well.
Yeah.
And that was through like the really important years of puberty. Like you forget like that the ages, it was around grade 7, grade 8 that I was in boarding school, like half of 7 and all of 8.
Yep.
And it's those formative years, particularly like girls, that really develop.
Yeah.
And I was in isolation of that, being at an all boys boarding school.
Yeah.
And I was too young to socialize with any girls in other schools, right? Because, we're interested in playing football.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, around grade 10 or like 9/10, I go to a unisex school, like I think grade 9. I go to a unisex school first time. I'm looking around like, holy shit, there's all these women, like all these girls. What the hell's going on? It was I was such a weird, awkward kid for the first 6 months until I learnt how to deal with that socially.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so weird.
Have you got any funny stories about
Well, not really any funny stories, but it was just like consistent because the girls very quickly, once, you know, I was the new kid, right? And coming in at grade 9, it's a bit weird year to come into the school. And they all knew that I came from all boys schools before that. And even before I went to the boarding school, I went to all boys school. So it was like, you know, all boys school, and then I was just this awkward like kid, and I think they fuck with me a little bit because of that. But not really, like nothing that really just stood out. I just remember being real awkward and looking around like wide-eyed, like what the hell. It's really funny, but yeah, I very quickly adjusted, and it was quite an awkward period for me.
Yeah, I think everybody goes through this phase, like, you know, you're a boy and you're playing games and you're doing all these sorts of things, and then suddenly you start to look around and go, wow.
Yeah,
like,
puberty in a nutshell.
What's going on here?
Yeah. I think that whole puberty awakening was like exacerbated because of my isolation from it previously. So yeah, it was. I remember just hitting me like a ton of bricks. But it was a lot better being at a unisex school. You know, not having being able to go home every night was you know, really important. With boarding school, if there's any bullying, which there was a lot, particularly being a rural, like country school that it was, you know, some of the kids had a lot harder upbringings than I did, and bullying was incredible. I witnessed the worst bullying in school I've ever seen at boarding school, like so bad, if I can tell one story.
Go.
That there was this one kid. I think every grade at every school in the world has that one kid that unfortunately draws attention to themselves for the wrong reasons. And we had one of those kids who was a boarder. And he was just the target of bullying. He made himself the target, you know, not his fault, but I digress. And the amount of bullying, not just from people our year, but years higher than us, because we were year 7s and then obviously 8, he got targeted so immensely. It was so bad that some of the higher grades, I think year 9s, broke into our dormitory during the day. It's quite easy with a coat hanger. I think they came through the back door, and they targeted this kid's bed and pissed all over his bed, all over his things, just everywhere. It was just covered in urine. So he came back from school that day. So they obviously broke in during lunchtime, and that whole section of the dorm just smelt like urine, and he was just in tears, like wailing. And I don't know how he coped, because he ended up staying at that school until he graduated. I don't know how he coped, but even just being friends with that kid and knowing him by association, it was pretty traumatic. Hey, but it was pretty rough. And there was other things like, you know, when you're asleep, people would egg you when you're sleeping, or like just mess with you. And you know, boys will be boys in that sense. Like some of it was more harmless, but I remember that like urine attack as being very vicious. Yeah,
that is actually pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And you like, you don't obviously haven't. Can't really connect with the guy anymore, right? Like you don't really know.
I remember his name, but I don't have him on any social media. Like I don't associate with anyone from that school, because again, this was like, I think MySpace was the thing. I didn't even have Facebook then. So yeah, I don't have any connections with any of them, to be honest. But
I always think it's, you know, they're always the ones that end up being those stories. So it's going to go one of two ways, right? Either that guy is going to be like, he's probably some ultra famous, rich, you know, successful businessman now. Or he's one of those gone postal types and he wants to kill everyone. Like,
I'm leaning toward the postal.
But it's like, bastard. You know, like when you cop abuse like that, like I think anybody that, I think it's the bell curve, right? So if you think about the bell curve, so at the extremes, you're going to have people that will be successful no matter what. And you have people that will, you know, go postal no matter what. But the ones in the middle are the ones that like, they could go either way.
Yeah, where they're leaning toward one, and then it just takes this
so,
sort of
so
event.
What, you know, so sometimes, you know, it's like there are people that have a bad home situation, and then that becomes the excuse for a lot of the other failures that might be in their life. And then you could have another person in exactly that same home situation, but uses that as fuel to the fire to go and say, well, I don't want my home situation to be like that.
Absolutely.
You know? So like I always find it odd, you know, that you can have two people that go through very similar experiences, but then have two very different out results as a result of it. Just from how they approached it from a mental perspective, right? Like I think, you know, if you're in that kid's shoes, you like, and I think, you know, the successful mindset is typically to think about, well, what could I have done, right? Well, how am I complicit in getting this outcome? But like sometimes people are just rat bags. Right?
Yeah.
Like
100%.
Unless you've gone and pissed on all their on all their stuff, like there's no real reason for them to come and do something that extreme to you. So in from a high school perspective, like academically? Like, what were the subjects that you were interested in? What did you like to study?
Yeah, so for the HSC, I did English, like extension and advanced English, advanced math, history. I think I dropped chemistry because I'm like, fuck that. And I did physics. So for the HSC, I honestly didn't do too well.
Yep.
I think my academics were really great up until year 12. And I think it might have been the
girls.
Yeah. No, I think it was like, looking back on it was probably the pressure to perform that I decided not to partake, if that makes sense. Like there was all this build up, like pressure. I knew that I could do well if I studied. And I think that I rebelled against that whole situation by approaching it, but like, I don't give a fuck. So I didn't study at all.
You gave yourself an excuse to
exactly,
not do well.
Exactly. Yeah. I gave myself an out because I'm like, if I don't study and if I don't try, when I fail, it's to be expected. And that's exactly what happened. My HSC marks, like my ATAR was pretty terrible. But it was so bad that I had been accepted into ADFA, the Defence Force Academy, and my ATAR was too low to get the position. So they had a job for me, but I needed a minimum. It was only like a 70 ATAR, and because I tanked it so hard, and in the back of my mind, it's like, yeah, I'm going in the Navy. Everything's fine. My life's made. I don't need to try. Like, fuck this, blah blah blah. And I came in at like a 63, and I'm like, far out. So I got a letter, but then it got reversed. Yeah, it got reversed because there's obviously a clause that you need like a 70 point something or other to get into whatever degree I wanted. Well, air quote wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I still did end up joining the Navy, but it was a couple of years after that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I went direct entry instead.
Okay. So, two questions. So the first question is obviously, what made you want to join the Navy in the first place?
So I wanted to be in the Army ever since I was very, very young. A cousin of mine was in the infantry. He's no longer in the infantry. And when I was very, very young, like around 12, I just so happened where we live, it was close to where he lived. So I connected with him a lot. And that was when I think he was about to go on his first tour to Iraq. This is when it was really kicking off. So he did, I believe, 2 tours to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. And I just idolized this man. I thought he was like the shit.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be just like him. He talked me into being an officer because he was like, you're smarter than this, you don't need to be carrying around all this gear. Like, be an officer, be smart, be like, don't be a dick. What he told me from like the age of 12 is like, when you become an officer, don't be a dick. Don't forget about the little people,
Yeah.
But I digress. So I wanted to be just like him. And then as I got older, I looked into the recruiting process and all the jobs that were available. And I decided that I'd prefer to, instead of joining the infantry to be an officer, I wanted to be a clearance diver in the Navy because that really, really quite interested me.
Yep.
So I decided to go down the Navy route. And my cousin took it pretty well. He's like, as long as you're joining, like, I don't care.
Okay.
So he was great about it, really, really supportive. So it was pretty much me deciding that I still want to be in the Defence Force, but I think clearance diver more suits the direction I wanted to go. Yeah.
And why did you like that idea of being a clearance diver?
It's interesting. It was kind of like the closest thing, this is going to sound really cheesy, but it's the closest thing that in my mind anyway, the Australian Defence Force has to be SEALs.
Yep.
The reality is very different. The closest thing we have is SAS and commandos.
Yep.
But in on paper and the way they market the job is it's Navy SEALs. Yeah, exactly. Like tactical assault group and just it interested me in that sense. But in order to, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but in order to become a clearance diving officer in the Navy, you need to join as a maritime warfare officer. Okay. So effectively the main role of what's called an MWO, a maritime warfare officer, is a position called the officer of the watch. So the person in charge of driving a ship. And that is the main role. Yep. And you need to do that in order to become a clearance diving officer. So that's what I did. I joined as an MWO. And about 2 years into my training, or 2 or 3 years, I think, you need to do a clearance to dive medical. And I failed that. So I was in a position where I joined the Navy to pursue being a clearance diver, and then I was unable to do it medically.
Wow.
So
what was the reason that they failed you medically?
So it was my lungs. Okay. So I have childhood asthma, and throughout like my early 20s, late teens, my asthma had pretty much gone. But unbeknownst to me, it was just pretty much dormant because of how like fit I was. So I was very, very into fitness. So I'd never had any issues with it, never needed a Ventolin. I didn't even own a Ventolin at the time, but they ran me through a specific test where you got to pretty much inhale like salt water. Like it's like inhale this like salty water in like a solution, and I failed that. Okay. So my lung capacity was fine, but I was unable to pass that. And it's probably for the best because the last couple of years I've had some asthma symptoms again. So,
come up.
Yeah, I'm still an asthmatic, unfortunately, which I found out through that. But asthmatics shouldn't be clearance divers. So,
fair enough.
So it was very fair enough on the behalf of the medical side. But it was very disheartening, and that's why eventually I left the Navy. But enjoy my time.
Yep. Okay, and that was going to be my second question in relation to when you have this, you thought you had this opportunity with ADFA, and then it's been revoked. Yeah. Do you remember the emotions that you had attached to that? Like, obviously you'd be pretty upset, right?
I was very disappointed, but at the same time, I was like, "Oh, just go direct entry." You know what I mean? I was disappointed in myself because I knew that I could have easily, like, without sounding arrogant, I could have easily achieved a 78 ATAR.
Yep.
Like I got a 63 by just rocking up, sort of thing. So I could have achieved it, and it was very disappointing. Obviously, there was a lot of shame around that, but at the same time, I very quickly shifted. Like, it's okay, I'll just do direct entry. Yep. And I did. I pursued that instead. So it was a bit of a blow to my ego, but it was definitely a blessing in disguise because I don't think that I would have really suited the ADFA environment. Okay. Just with how I was academically and where I was at life-wise, I don't think it would have been very smart for me to roll straight from high school into ADFA. Yep. I really needed that like two or 3 years to grow up. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I see that a lot. So to give you an example, right? So when I entered the workforce, I was studying at uni. And so I was studying engineering and law at uni, but I basically signed up for an apprenticeship at a Toyota dealership, so as an apprentice mechanic. And it was really interesting for me because when you do an apprenticeship, you're with a whole bunch of guys that are obviously doing their apprenticeship. And there's not many people that would have been in the same circumstance as me, like going to uni and then also going to TAFE. So I feel like I'm very fortunate that I got to see both sides of tertiary education. Like I got to see what is it like to do a university degree and what was it like to be at TAFE, right? And the focuses are very different. I think the universities focus very much on the theoretical side, and you learn how to do your calculations and all these different things. But from a practical hands-on use ability, the TAFE side of it, that vocational education was so much stronger. Like I would say I actually probably enjoyed my time at TAFE a bit more than I enjoyed my time at uni as a result of it. But I guess why I bring that up is because you're dealing with very, very different people. A lot of the times the guys that were going to TAFE, they might have been, some of them were only like, 15 and 16, had left school and just wanted to start working. So from a maturity standpoint, their maturity was very, very different compared to the people that I was going to university with. And so, I think that's one of the things that has helped me in my life is being able to talk with all different types of people, because those guys obviously, to be one of the guys, you got to communicate in a different kind of a way. It's they're focused on different things. What amuses them is obviously different. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're just
different.
Yep. Yeah, they're just focused on different things.
Yeah, 100%.
And then obviously if they haven't finished school and they're sort of, they're still maturing as people. Like when you're 15, 16, 17, even up to your 20s, you're still changing so much as a person. And, I wasn't classified as a mature age apprentice because I started before I was 21, but I was probably 20 at the time. And, have had, so many different experiences that, it was interesting for me to then see, how these guys viewed life versus how, other people viewed life. And then you're trying to put that all together, right? And I think just like, as you said, coming straight out of school and going straight into that environment, it might not have been the right thing. Yeah,
definitely not. Looking back. So it's definitely a blessing in disguise, that's for sure.
Yeah. So what did you do in that couple of years before you...
I worked in security. I was a gym rat. I just lived at the gym, like just lifting, and I worked in security at nights. That's pretty much all I did, and played video games and studied to pass my officer selection board to be in the Navy. And that's all I did. My whole focus was just making enough money to keep myself entertained, biding my time until I got the next letter of offer, and lo and behold, I did the officer selection board and got a strong recommendation, and off I went.
Okay. Because you brought up the lifting, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, send it.
Because I am curious, so how did you start getting involved in fitness? Did that start in high school or did that start?
It started just after high school. I just graduated high school. I might have even been in my last year. I think, it was the year after. So it was the first year I left high school. So I was about 18.
Yep.
And I had a good friend who still lives up in Newcastle, and I still keep in contact with Adam Watt. And I don't know how the conversation started. He just started, right? He just started lifting himself. Young guy, full of testosterone, first 6 months of lifting, all the beginner's gains. He was telling everyone that would listen how awesome it was.
Yeah.
And I listened.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, if this guy thinks it's so great, like if he's that passionate about it, and he's gotten so much bigger, like he would have been small in comparison to like a man, like a man that lifts, but to our age, like 17, 18-year-olds, he was huge. So I'm like, yeah, this is great. Get chicks, all tick, 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 all that good gear. So I decided to go hard, and I'm very all or nothing type of guy. Like if I do something, I have to do it obsessively. So I did obsessively. I went to the gym pretty much from the first time I walked in. I was there nearly every day. And it just grew from there. And it's been a passion for the last nearly 10 years now, about 8 years. Just consistently exercising, got better and better. Got my PT quals just for fun. Decided to go into coaching. Then that led me to nutrition, which is my real passion in the space is nutrition, which is what you heard on the Jungle Brothers podcast. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So when you started started going into the gym and things like that, did you start with a personal trainer or did you just think I'll just go there myself?
Oh, I just went there with Adam. Like he was like, I was like, yep, sweet. You're the boss. You
tell me what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Looking back, we knew less than nothing because we thought we knew something, but it was all wrong. So it was worse than knowing nothing. So I did that for about 12 months. And then I decided to get a personal trainer. Best decision ever. Like young kid, no money, just working in security, had like barely any money to afford a PT. But one of our friends, he just started personal training. He just got his qualifications, so he's very, very new. But he knew way more than us. He was like a few years older than us as well. So he was like the god of all knowledge in our perspective, and he was very cheap because he was again new to being a personal trainer. And it was perfect fit. So I did probably, with him probably like 15 sessions over like a year period maybe. And it was best decision ever. Because it just fixed up everything that I was doing wrong and put me on the right path. And then from there, I was able to, do my own self-study on top of that. And then I obviously got my quals as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I always find that interesting, like some people, they start going to the gym and they just, I don't know whether they really think about, do they actually know what they're doing or they just assume that they know what they're doing? Because it's very complex, right? People just think, oh yeah, you just lift heavy weights or whatever. It's got nothing to do with it. There's a whole bunch of technique that you need to understand. There's anatomy that you got to sort of get into and start to understand. So, for me, I never really got heavy into lifting. Like it wasn't really like what I found enjoyable. I always found martial arts enjoyable. So, and I think that's good from like, when you're doing like those body weight style movements, calisthenic style movements, they help you with your motor control, your coordination. And so, I can do those lifts, but it wasn't really anything that was like a passion of mine. But I remember like I was at a CrossFit place for a little while, just doing a couple of sessions a week just to sort of, bolster the martial arts training. And they actually were really good because the people there actually cared about technique and things like that. So it's not like the, what most
stereotype
of CrossFit where you're just, pounding, ollie lifts till failure. Like it was like, before every session, it'd be like, okay, let's just check everybody's technique. Let's make sure everybody knows what you're doing. And so, before you even start and then get into the CrossFit workout, it was like, you got to make sure that you know the movements properly. And then, they'll scale the weight depending on how good you were at doing those movements. So I thought that was really, really good. I don't know if every CrossFit gym is like that, but that was the place that I went to, and it was a good experience. Like I just felt like, if I was going to do like that style of exercise, then that's the kind of place that you want to go because there's guidance, right? Whereas a lot of people like they'll go and then they'll just, whether it's like, oh, I want to get a bigger chest, so I'm just going to bench. But then it's like, okay, but if your benching technique's wrong, like what are you really developing? And then if you tore your pec or shoulder or something like that. It's high risk of injury, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I always like to ask that question when people tell me, I started to get into fitness and lifting and things like that, because I found that most of the people that have experienced or had a great have stuck with it have generally always started with somebody at some point.
Yeah. It's definitely a necessity. There are a lot of self-taught people and, they're in the game long enough and just do their own study enough. But for anyone that, even if you're in your first 2 years of lifting, definitely get a PT.
Yep.
Even just a couple sessions. They don't need to be like a superstar PT that you pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to. It can be just a local guy or girl. And chances are they know a lot more than you, so they can definitely put you in the right direction.
Yep.
Highly recommended. Yeah, I totally agree with you there.
Yeah. So from a resource perspective, obviously you did the study, but was there something else, like from whether it was a book or a podcast or YouTube videos that you like to watch in relation to that? Yeah.
So, I mean, I've consumed so much fitness content over the years and nutrition content, like unbelievable. Podcasts, innumerable. I always cycle between whatever I'm interested in at the time. Funnily enough, for the last 6 years, I've been listening to one podcast that on and off, but it's gone to shit in my opinion now. It's unfortunate. I think it hasn't gone. It's not bad. Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast is the podcast name.
Yeah, I listen to that. Yep.
And I've found that over the years, Ben has transitioned in his own personal journey away from fitness and what I was interested in him in the first place to more spiritual, family, giving spiritual advice, giving parenting advice. And that's just not where I'm at in my life right now. So I think we are on very different trajectories, paths. Yeah. And we've sort of just had a bit of a misalignment. So it's not, the podcast is still brilliant and he's still a brilliant guy. And I still own all of his books and, what have you. But yeah, it's just not something I'm interested in right now.
Yep.
But yeah, man, we could do a full 2 hours on just on nutrition resources and fitness resources. But yeah, I've consumed a lot of content, read a lot, and obviously learnt a lot in my qualifications. I'm also an ISSN sports nutrition specialist. Yep. So I learned a lot pursuing that qualification as well. That's that certificate.
Yep.
So yeah.
The ones that stand out for me, I like that Kelly Starrett book, How to Become a Supple Leopard.
I actually have a signed copy in my office.
There you go.
Yeah, shit you not. 25th birthday, my girlfriend, because I'm obsessed with Kelly.
Yeah.
My girlfriend wrote him and asked him to sign a book.
Wow.
And he actually he didn't reply. Margaret, if you've seen any of his stuff, she's in a lot of his videos. Margaret replied and got a copy of it. Bought a local copy, got him to sign it, and then sent it to her for my 25th birthday, and it's
that's
unreal.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Because that's a fantastic resource, right? And at the end of the day, he covers all the major movements.
Yeah.
And he also gives you modalities in terms of mobility. I don't want to sound like an advertising spiel, but I just feel it's one of those books that. So I actually, because I know Firas Zahabi, the coach at TriStar who trained George St. Pierre and stuff like that. He would always talk about that book, and I don't remember. I can't remember if I had read that book. I bought that book off his recommendation, or I read a different book of Kelly Starrett's. He's got another book called Deskbound, and it was talking about the damage of sitting for 8 to 10 hours a day is doing to everybody that you don't think about, because when you're sitting in your work cubicle or whatever, and you're sitting at your desk, and if your posture's not right, but even if your posture is correct, your body is naturally going to adapt to what you're making it do. So if you're making it sit for long periods of time, it's going to get better at sitting, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be functional when it comes to, okay, now you want to move. It's still thinking about sitting, right? And trying to be good at sitting. And so I read that book first, I think, and that actually, motivated me to then, I got rid of the normal desk and I had a standing desk.
Nice.
And so I became that eccentric guy where people would come in and go, "What, you don't sit?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "No, I'll sit if I'm talking to you."
Yeah.
But if I'm working and I'm on the phone, I'm going to be standing. And I just found it to be, it made me more productive. And I think that from a sales perspective, because a lot of the time you are on the phone. But I feel like, certain things, if you're crunching data and things like that, you probably do need to be sitting. You need a bit of a workstation, etc. But after I read that book, he also had some modalities for treating the common injuries and things like that. And then then I went back to the Supple Leopard book, and that just had so much more.
It's brilliant.
So I always like to. I think that's a worthy one of mention. And then obviously the podcasts and things like that are always, eye-opening in terms of everybody's got a different opinion. I think, when you listen to people, advocating for whether it's a plant-based diet or animal-based diet.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different advocates in the space, right?
Yeah. When it comes to nutrition, I think the biggest issue with the whole scope of the body of work and all the influences that are in different spaces is everyone responds to food differently.
Yeah.
So take carnivore, for example.
Yep.
For the carnivore diet, it is brilliant for certain people with certain conditions or certain people that respond to food a certain way.
Yep.
However, it's not a one size fit all.
No.
And I think the problem is because, say for example, if you're in a lot of pain, you had a lot of inflammation, your food was basically attacking you. Like, you couldn't get the nutrition that you needed from just your standard diet. All of a sudden you discover veganism or you discover a carnivore diet.
Yep.
And that just fixed everything for you almost overnight.
Yep.
It made you happier, gave you energy. It changed your life.
Yep.
In your mind, because of your response to it, it must be perfect for everyone.
Yeah.
So you become dogmatic.
Yep.
You know, you become attached to this idea, and any challenge to that is almost a challenge on yourself as a person because you've identified with it.
Yep.
And you find that in so many different areas. But with food, because food is such a personal experience, I find that the arguments and the viciousness in that sphere is just so pronounced. And I think that there's a lot of voices of reason out there that are very balanced, but there's also a lot of obsessed individuals. And then with veganism, I mean, they have it's the same, but they have a different sort of spin, like some of them, you know, with whole ethical and environmental concerns. And that's just another layer on top of that again. So it gets very messy. I like to avoid the whole plant-based diet versus, you know, omnivorous diet conversation, but I will talk anyone's ear off when it comes to like nutrition for sports performance. And, you know, I like to take a positive approach rather than and just avoid those debates, if you will.
Okay, well, I don't want to put you on the spot. So you
send it.
Like, have you tried, like, I guess, you know, all these different styles of diet?
Tried a few, yeah.
And was there anything that, and so this is why I asked this question, because was there anything that worked specifically for you?
It's not really a diet, but what I have stuck with, what I tried in that sort of fad space, if you will, or like, you know, give it a name diet, is just intermittent fasting. Yep. It's not really a diet. It's just a compressed feeding window, really. And it's become very mainstream now. It's not like frowned upon or anything like that. So yeah, I do practice a lot of intermittent fasting. I go through bouts of, you know, macro counting. I have a general idea of my macronutrients. So that's more what's known as a if it fits your macros style approach. And it's a very much
protein, carbs, fats.
100%. And the basic concept for those listening is that so long as you're eating your protein, carb, and fat targets for the day,
doesn't matter what it is.
It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
I like the concept in terms of tracking your macros, but the eat whatever you want and it doesn't matter. I think that's pretty rubbish.
Yep.
And that's a bodybuilding thing. Yep. And that's how people cope with, you know, the very hectic weight loss that is or fat loss rather that's required for bodybuilding. I don't think it's very healthy, but I digress. I have utilized that as well. I have tried keto I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have. It didn't vibe with me. Now I've heard the conversation about keto back and forth, like, oh, you didn't do it long enough or this and that. But man, I did it for like nearly 3 months. I think I did it long enough. It didn't really vibe with me. But my girlfriend did it at the same time. Absolutely loved it. She thrived. So she adapted to it really well. Obviously she doesn't do it now because it's very difficult. But keto wasn't really my thing. One thing I haven't tried is the carnivore diet. The reason that I haven't really tried that is my access to the type of meat required. Like, you really want to eat a lot of organ meats. You want to get, you know, very quality source meats if you can. And that's more of like a financial thing. It's an incredibly expensive diet to follow correctly. Yeah. So I've been interested in the literature surrounding it, but it hasn't really drawn me in enough to give it a go. And of course, like the paleo, I've dabbled with that as well, but it's, you know, it's just eating clean. That's
I think it's and that's what I think a lot of people take for granted, is that they think that the diet's going to be the silver bullet. You know, everybody wants the easy answer. Yeah. But, you know, there's simple ways to look at things, and sometimes a simple approach works. Because if you get too complicated, it's the paralysis analysis where you don't actually do anything.
Yeah, because you're overwhelmed. You're stuck.
Right? Yeah. But on the flip side, it's like, what works for one person may not work for another person. Like I'll give you an example. So I used to, when I was in Wollongong, or working in Wollongong, I used to go to this butcher and buy, they would do aged steak. And I loved it so much because it tasted so good that I basically would buy 2 steaks and have a steak for breakfast and a steak for lunch every day. Right? Great way to break the bank, because, you know, aged steak is obviously a little bit dearer than your normal cut of steak.
Yeah.
But, you know, I would get like these thick, 400 gram cuts.
Nice.
You know, and sear it on a cast iron pan on the roof of the dealership.
Nice.
When nobody could really see me. That's what I used to do. And what happened was I actually started to, and what I thought triggered it, because I remember I did a Grappling Industries, and I was eating a protein bar that day. And at the end of the day, I'd like broken out in rashes, and I was really, really itchy. And I thought, oh shit, maybe it was the protein bar. So, and I was thinking, oh, this protein bar stuffed me up, because I was itchy for weeks. And what I actually realized, it was because I was eating aged steak that has like, it's got, whether it's amines or something, it's, well, you probably know the word for it, amines. It's like a type of an allergen.
Right, okay.
That happens when you age the meat. That had like already caused my body to be on like a heightened level. And so anytime I would have something that was slightly would cause some slight irritation. So let's say I'd have a beer as an example, that would trigger me and I'd get really itchy.
Right, it's like your histamine threshold was really high.
Yeah, so I think there's amines and there's histamines.
Right.
And so so I think it was the amines or something when I finally worked out what it was, because I was Googling it. By eating like aged steak every day, my amines threshold was already at max. And then anytime I'd have something that would just tip me over, I'd break out into like rashes, and I'd be so itchy, but I couldn't work out why. And I was thinking, like, here I am eating this really clean diet, like every day I'm just eating, smashed a couple of steaks. How could this be bad for me? And it was only after, because how I worked it out was when I left Wollongong, I wasn't eating the steaks anymore, and I went back to normal.
Oh, no.
And I wasn't itchy anymore.
It's like a forced elimination diet.
Right? It was like a forced elimination diet. And then I realized, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't be eating aged steak every day. Right? Like it's probably like, because in the aging process, it raises the amine profile, and that's what caused it. So, but yeah, like if I had stayed down there, I probably would never have worked that out. Like it took me ages to work out what it was. And it was only because it had finally been removed from my diet. All this time I was thinking I had this maybe an out-of-date protein bar that suddenly triggered something in my immune system. And no, it wasn't. It was just my own stupidity thinking that was a healthy way to eat when it wasn't. So, it's one of those things. You don't really make the correlation until you've taken it out. Like the other night, so I've got like a bit like I don't know whether it's some inflammation in my elbow or something, but the other night I was eating those corn thins, right?
Right, yeah.
But not just the normal, unsalted corn thins. I was having the ones with the cheese flavoring on top. And I smashed half a packet before I went to bed. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, far out. Like the swelling in my elbow was bad because I would do this and then I could feel like the fluid moving around.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, okay, I should probably lay off the corn thins because that was the only thing I had right before dinner. And then I went to bed, and then whether it's, the salt or whatever, some sort of fluid retention. It just made me think, there's so many times that, when you're younger, I wouldn't have noticed anything like that. And it's because I'm getting older that I have like, all these.
Is your diet very structured? Like, do you eat very similar foods normally?
I wouldn't say that it's always the same foods. But I would say it's relatively clean because my wife and I, she'll cook most of the time. We're eating home food.
Right.
So the only real processed food we eat is like, those kinds of little snacks or whatever that we
that
buy
makes sense how your body responded to it so quickly.
Yeah.
It's because normally you're eating such a clean, almost predictable in your body's point of view diet. Yeah. So then you introduce something like that
and then
it's
you
inflammation.
Feel it.
Boom. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. I would notice that a lot. Like take supplements, for example. There's a lot of supplements that people don't really feel the effects of, particularly when it comes to like nootropics and things like that, because there's so many different mixing signals in your body. Because if you're not eating like a very clean or very predictable diet, like the same sort of foods, obviously clean foods, then you're not going to be able to notice any changes. When I was bodybuilding though, I just so happened to have like a mutual sort of contact, a friend who was trying to develop nootropics and develop them and sell patents and what have you. So he's having me test them. The reason that I would respond to them and it would be very noticeable is because I was eating the exact same food every single day, nothing in my body was changing with the exception of the introduction of this supplement that he was trying to formulate. So that reminds me of your story, but in the inverse is, when you're eating clean, you're going to notice differences in your body's response to foods. And that's how an elimination diet works when you're reintroducing foods. So that's interesting.
Well, it's the same thing. Like I think with if you don't drink a lot of alcohol, right, and then you have that one drink and it's like, ooh, you know, it sort of hits you a lot harder. But I think that's a good thing. You save money.
You're a cheap drunk.
Cheap drunk. That's it. I'd rather have that.
100%.
All right, let's go back to the Defence Force, because I'm curious about, you know, so after you've gotten in, can you share a bit more about what was that experience like? So I guess, you know, what do they put you through? Did you obviously have to do some sort of basic military training?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, I joined the Navy as an officer, as a MWO, a maritime warfare officer. So our basic training did back then. I think that it's changing now as we speak, but it lasts for 6 months. Sailor training, I believe, lasts for 8 weeks, somewhere around there. So it's about triple the length of a sailor. You go down to Creswell, which is down near Jarvis Bay, Nowra way, down south of Sydney. And you spend 6 months at Creswell going through all the basic officer training. So you do the basic things you would expect, like drill, dress and bearing. You learn about naval history. You learn about current capabilities of the Navy, all the ship names, all of that sort of stuff. Very, very general. So you're mixing with engineers, you're mixing with the lawyers, doctors, nurses, all the officer categories, pilots as well. And then after that 6 months, once you graduate, in order to graduate, you just have to pass a leadership test, like a practical leadership examination, or a series of them throughout the training. Then you're put out into your categorization training. And my categorization training was at Watson's Bay in Sydney, so Sydney eastern suburbs, at HMAS Watson. And that's my training from start to finish lasts just over 3 years.
Wow.
So it's a long time. It's very expensive and it takes a long time to get qualified as an officer of the watch. That training, that categorization training, it's mixed between being a shore-based training at HMAS Watson and sea-based training all around the naval bases of Australia. So a lot of the time people are sent to Darwin for a stint of their training for 6 months. People sometimes either split between East and West for what's known as Phase 2 training. Like I said, they go to Darwin for Phase 3 training, and then it culminates in a bridge simulator training block and assessment that's back at HMAS Watson for 6 months. So my time was split between Sydney and Darwin really for my training periods.
And that's to make sure that you're able to command a ship essentially.
Well, that's all COs or commanding officers of warships in the Australian Navy are all maritime warfare officers. So in order to be a CO, you need to be an MWO. So it's the pathway to command. And normally most chief of Navy will be an MWO or a pilot. Normally it's one of the two. Most of them have been maritime warfare officer though. So it's the pathway to higher command in the Australian Navy. So the way the job works is when you're an officer of the watch, you're in charge of the watch on a bridge. So imagine a warship. You have the bridge of a warship. On that bridge, you have one officer in charge. Normally, you'll have an assistant officer called the assistant officer of the watch, and you will have a bridge team. The bridge team will consist of a helmsman, lookouts, communicators, particularly if you're on a large ship, and there will be a position in the ops room, the operations room, that will work for the officer of the watch as well. So pretty much the officer of the watch is the eyes and ears of the ship and is directly responsible to the captain, reports directly to the CO. And there's only 2 people on a ship that are above the officer of the watch when they're undergoing that position, and that's the CO and what's known as the XO, the executive officer. So everyone else answers to the officer of the watch. So it's a pretty big position to have at such a young age. It's an awesome job.
Awesome, and also laden with responsibility.
Anything that goes wrong is the officer of the watch's fault. In the Navy, there's lots of slang, like a lot of slang, and we refer to it. It's of being boned in, like being dressed down or yelled at. I've been boned in by the CO for things that I didn't even do, like that weren't even me. You know what I mean? That I had absolutely no influence on, and I just cop it big time. So anything that goes wrong is the officer of the watch's fault, and that's something that you need to learn how to deal with. That's why training takes so long, because I mean, at one point, my officer of the watch time was on HMAS Adelaide, which is our largest ship. It's a large amphibious warship. And at one point on board this ship, we had nearly 2,000 people. And the night of the ship, like when the ship is transiting, the officer of the watch is solely responsible for everyone's life. Like everyone on board is in the hands of a 23-year-old guy on the ship. MO.
Wait, so when you say it's amphibious, that doesn't mean it's a submarine, right?
No, it means that it has amphibious capability. So think about it's called a LHD. The class of ship is a LHD, a landing helicopter dock. Landing helicopter dock. So basically its main role is, if there was an all-out warfare, is to pick up the army, put them on the ship, deploy them on land. And it's done through landing craft, which are like amphibious, like landing craft. So a boat that can take troops and land them on shore. And it can carry tanks as well. So it's to land the infantry, to land the troops with all their equipment. And also it does that through helicopter transport as well. So I believe they can carry 16 helicopters and like, I don't know, 8 landing craft or something along those lines.
So, okay, I've got a bit of a curious question. I don't know if you have the answer to this, right? So, I was doing a lot of reading into, our whole botched submarines fiasco, right? And so my understanding was that, back when Malcolm Turnbull said, we'll take the French submarines, but we'll strip out the nuclear power and instead go with the diesel hybrids. Like, from a capability standpoint, obviously they're massively decreased versus what the nuclear powered sub could do, right? So I think, and you can correct me, I don't know if you know the stats, but I think it was like, a diesel hybrid submarine could only travel at whether it was like 10 knots or something like that. And obviously your above water fleet travels at 30 knots or something like that?
Can do, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so diesel submarines have advantages in certain aspects over nuclear submarines.
Okay.
The biggest advantage is noise.
Yep.
So currently our Collins class is our current serving submarines, and they're all diesel. They can be incredibly quiet over a nuclear sub.
Yep.
Nuclear submarines, though, can go incredibly fast. Some nuclear submarines can outrun a surface ship, which is insane. It's because of their nuclear power. Now, the problem with the speeds is when a nuclear submarine is going quickly, it's very noisy. And that's because of cavitation. Cavitation is basically, think of it as a propeller is going through the water. And that propeller, because of the high pressure, creates air bubbles. And those air bubbles explode. Now, with the acoustic equipment that warships have, particularly warships that are designed to find submarines, they pick up on that cavitation. And you're incredibly noisy. But sometimes a submarine doesn't need to be quiet, it just needs to run away. An example of that, and again, I'm not an expert, I'm not a submariner, I'm not an expert on submarines, so and a lot of the submarine information is classified even to my knowledge when I was in. So but I'll give you an example of when a submarine doesn't care if it's noisy. Say, for example, a submarine needs to take out a high value unit, a HVU. They deploy their torpedo and then they run away as quick as they can. Or they are attacking the HVU maybe with a missile instead of a torpedo. And if a submarine launches a missile, it's referred to as the finger of God because it points directly where the submarine is. Launch the missile and run away very, very quickly. Now, if a submarine can outrun a ship, it can run away successfully. But what a submarine cannot run away from is a helicopter. And a helicopter is actually the biggest threat to a submarine, is a helicopter with dipping sonar. That's just a bit of an aside. All my submarine trivia coming out.
Yeah, it's good.
But yeah. So I think in my personal opinion, I don't know a whole lot about the nuclear submarine acquisition, but I think just from my experience being in the Navy, being in that world, I think it's the right decision. I really do.
So you think, to get the nuclear subs?
To get the nuclear submarines, Despite the fact that the French submarine program has now been scratched, I think that it was already delayed. And I think having off-the-shelf nuclear subs that were in partnership with the States is a very intelligent move moving forward, particularly considering where our strategic alliances lie with the States. But yeah, I think it's the right call.
Yeah. No, look, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think, from what I understand going into the history of it was that part of the reason they didn't go with the nuclear subs in the first place is because the nuclear batteries would need to be replaced in 10 years' time. And we didn't have that capability in Australia to do that due to archaic laws from 1998 where we made, the research into nuclear technology illegal. Right, which is crazy because we have probably some of the world's largest resources when it comes to nuclear minerals, but we can't actually use them for our own benefit. We've got to go and sell them to other people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little bit naive, but yeah, hopefully times will change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I did want to ask that question because I thought I want to fact check myself and see if I was correct in my understanding, and you did help me to understand. Like at the end of the day, the cavitation thing, like. Is only an issue, obviously, when you want to run, right?
Yeah, and nuclear subs can be quiet.
Yep.
They can be quiet.
And then don't they last longer underwater as well?
Oh, yes. And the reason for that is because of snorkeling. So, and again, I might get some details wrong, but the concept I'm confident in is a diesel submarine needs to come up to what's known as snorkeling depth or PD, periscope depth, to snorkel.
Yeah.
Now, think like snorkel as in this is like the terminology they use, but basically it's just to vent exhaust and get in oxygen to be able to vent all the diesel exhaust, right? Because you're operating this diesel machinery, it has exhaust requirements.
Yep.
A nuclear sub does not have those requirements.
Yep.
I still believe that a nuclear sub needs to snorkel, but it's nowhere near as often as a diesel submarine needs to snorkel.
Yep.
So that's
a
generally
capability issue, right? So
exactly, and that's just the restrictions of the equipment.
Technology.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep. Okay. Cool. All right. So we've gone on our submarine tangent. We can come back into it. So, what sparked the decision to leave the Defence Force?
So it was a combination of many different factors. The first one was the whole failing my dive medical and not being able to pursue the specific specialization that I wanted to pursue. I became a navigator instead.
Okay.
Which I still enjoyed, but it wasn't why I joined and it's not what I wanted. So there was that's number one issue. The second issue is that there's a little bit of I undertook an incredibly difficult occupation in the Navy. It's very, very high stress. And the jobs keep getting more difficult. Like they kept getting harder and harder and harder. And not harder as in like intellectually, like there are challenges, but harder as in longer hours, more stress, less rewards, just incredible pressure and stress. And it was not until I saw my superiors, like people that were like 10 years ahead of me, and saw that they were having way harder time than I was having, despite how hard of a time I was having.
Yep.
Like I looked into the future and saw it doesn't get easier, it doesn't get better. And then the people above them, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Like
what causes that? Is that a resource issue? Or what?
I think it's yes, resources are a big part of it. Culture is another big part of it. And I think those are the two main contributing factors. And you have to remember that if you're trying to be a commanding officer, if you're trying to be a CO, which you in my line of position, in the work that I was doing in my job category, in order to become a CO, you have to jump through so many hoops. And then from CO, if you do well there, you might get what's called a second driver being a CO, and then you might get promoted to a star rank.
Yep.
So that's how you progress your career.
Yep.
It is incredibly difficult to do that, and you have a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on you. You, like, for example, when you're CO, you answer directly to the Chief of Navy. And the Chief of Navy answers to the PM. So, or Chief of Defence Force, PM, etc. They all sort of work together at the top.
Yep.
But it's incredibly stressful and difficult. So that was my future. That was, the path that I'd chosen. And looking at, my bosses effectively and their bosses, I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. Like, they look miserable.
Yeah.
They're sleep deprived. They're under an incredible amount of stress. They're incredibly unhealthy. Like they're overweight. They look like, I watched one of my commanding officers literally age in front of my eyes over the 18 months that I was posted on that ship.
Yeah.
Like from the day I joined to the day that he left, he aged in like 10 years in 18 months.
Yeah.
And that's not something, that I want to do, but it doesn't get better.
But that's not sustainable for anybody.
No, and then his next job, he got promoted out of that because he's an incredible man, like very, very tough, very hard, but incredible, like brilliant. And he got promoted. So he got promoted to 1 star, and I see a very bright future for him. I I don't expect him to not be Chief of Navy in 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and all of those positions that are in front of him are even more stressful than his CEO position.
Yeah.
Like, I just didn't think it was sustainable. And the second issue that I had with the Defence Force is, this is a little bit, I think it was my young mentality, but still it's the truth. So I'll tell you the truth, is I had issue with the fact that I could Google the exact salary of everyone in the Navy and it's on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
There's no escaping it. Like, in terms of, like, you put yourself through all this stress, you're working your ass off, you're working ridiculous hours, particularly at sea. It's insane the amount of hours that you work.
Yep.
You're being like flogged, and then I can Google and look up my salary for the next like 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's on a spreadsheet. I just had an issue that no matter what I did versus the person in the same position next to me, regardless of how much we work, we're going to earn the same amount of money. It's never going to change.
Yeah.
And, you know, our promotion schedule will be more or less the same.
Yeah.
Like, there are some outliers that get promoted early. Like, I was one of them. I got promoted early to lieutenant.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's you know, everything really evens out when you get further in your career.
Yeah.
So I just didn't like that my salary was capped on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So
that goes back to the culture of it, right? So you have this, if you, and it's an unintended consequence, because they're probably thinking it's a great idea to have the salaries mapped out so that people know, okay, if you're going to join the army, this is what you're in for.
Exactly.
But then if you've got somebody who is engaged and wants to push their career, but then they're stuck in the same sort of framework as everybody else, that becomes a cage, and all you want to do is get out of that cage. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, the Navy is one of those organizations that high performers get rewarded with more work.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's a
You're
consequence.
carrying the load for someone else.
Exactly. And in my last job, because I was, in my last like 18 months in the Navy, I was training junior officers at Watson. So that training that I spoke about, I was then being the instructor for that. And I found in that position, you could pretty much skate along and do sweet FA. You could do absolutely nothing. Yeah, you might get reprimanded here and there, but if you didn't care, you just crack on.
Yeah.
And then someone else is doing the work that you're not.
Yeah.
And, you know, that is what I saw firsthand, because there were people there that just didn't give a shit. Like, they were getting out.
Yep.
You know, it's joked, unfortunately, that it can be a graveyard for failed MOs, or like a graveyard for jaded MOs, that people just want to get out. Maybe they're ill, so they can't go to sea or whatever, so they're just waiting. It's like a holding pen. It's not a good environment. It's not what you think an instructor should be, like the best of the best. It's not. It's normally the opposite.
Don't worry. It's like I remember a few years ago we were chatting to one of my high school friends who'd become a doctor, and he was basically, you know, he's a specialist, so he's gone through all these years of schooling, right? No income throughout that period. And then, you know, we wonder why, you know, doctors want to charge you like a wounded bull once they become specialists. It's because, like, for the last 10 years, all they've been doing is, you know, studying and into academics. Everybody has already started a career, and yes, their income might not have been as high, but they've earned something over those years. But then when they get out, then it's like, you know, the dollars are really high, but it's, you know, it's very common to see, you know, jaded people in the medical profession as a result of it, right? Because, you know, you've been put through the ringer. And now
you're sitting there like, for what?
Yeah.
And I just, like, don't get me wrong, we get paid, particularly for our age, very, very well. Like, I think the Australian Defence Force is the second highest paid per capita Defence Force in the world, second only to Canada.
Okay.
So interesting fact for you.
Yep.
So we get paid very well.
Yep. But
at the same time, you get out and you can get into a position where you're very jaded. You're like, for what?
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, and this is just the nature of how large the organization is, you're a number.
Yep.
You know, everyone gets a what's called a PM Keys number when you join, and, you know, you're treated in a big part, particularly in the MWO world, as a number. It's our attrition rate so high. People always leave at lieutenant level.
Yep.
And then, unfortunately, it's because of people like me that leave that put the burden on the people that stay.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's not my fault. That's the organization, so you can't feel guilty.
Yep.
And I think I got taught that by a colleague of mine who, funnily enough, left to become a doctor, which is funny because you're just talking about that. And it took him to, like, really sit me down and say, because I was having, like, a medical thing, and I was going to have to leave the ship, and he had to sit me down and say, they will replace you in 24 hours. They're making it seem like a big deal because they don't want to have to do that, but you will be replaced so easily.
Yeah.
You're a number to them. Look after yourself. It was basically the message. And I still thank him for that, because it made me realize that, you feel loyalty and you feel like you owe them something, but really you don't.
It's so true. That applies to any corporation, organization, I think a lot of people get caught up in that.
It's a little bit pessimistic, but
it's not, because a good leader will actually tell you, hey, always look out for yourself.
Yeah.
I would say that to my staff. When I was in the automotive industry, I would say to them, hey, you do what's right for you. Like, I'll never hold anybody back from a promotion or a better opportunity, as long as that's what you want to do. I think the hardest thing is a lot of people actually don't know what they actually want to do, right? So, and I guess that leads into my next question, which is, when you've decided to leave the Defence Force, did you have a plan? Like, what was your...
Yeah, my departure was, we'll call it, was like 2.5 years in the making. I made the decision around my navigation time.
Yep.
So I got subspecialized as a navigator. I did my navigation course. I did very well. I duxed it. And I was so gung-ho on the Navy at that point. I was on cloud 9. The highest I've ever been, like Navy is my gravy, baby. Like fucking the ships are my chips, the whole 9 yards. Like, I was like, yes, the Navy is life. Cause I was like just killing it. I was a young guy, just crushing it. Just got promoted as well. Early promotion, just frothing on it. Right.
Yeah.
And then I had my first posting. My CO was the worst human I've ever met. Like, she crushed my dreams.
Yeah.
Like, destroyed. I was almost broken after that posting. She broke me. She was that nasty.
Wow.
Yeah, horrible person. And I don't mind publicly slamming her because, major issues. But it wasn't just that. It was like a combination of so many things that just sort of hit me all at once.
Yep.
And it just lost all the steam. And it was at that point. Before then, I was still considering leaving, but it was at that point I was like, nah, definitely leaving.
Yep.
So I spent the last 2 years of my Navy time, my minimum time requirement, which was 6 years, of planning my exit. I'd had already been doing nutrition coaching online. I already had my PT nutrition quals. I started taking up videography as well, and the plan was in motion then to leave. I started saving for my exit, so I did everything right. Unfortunately, a lot of people go through what I'm talking about, but go through it at the end of their time and don't have 2 years to plan, don't have 12 months, and they just they make a snap decision and leave.
Yeah.
And I've actually run into one of those people before who I knew for many years he was in the army. We met during a tri-service exercise, right? And I met him in Sydney on a train. It just so happened to run into this guy. And I was like, holy crap, like, how you doing? Rah, rah, rah. And he started explaining that he'd left the army. And I was like, oh, that's good for you, all this sort of stuff. And then we just so happened to be going the same way on the same train. And I spent about 20 minutes talking to him. But as I continued to talk to him, he sort of, the brave face, oh, I'm doing well, sort of to unravel. And it turns out that he was homeless and he was not doing well at all. And he had no money and, he was struggling. And, we sort of parted ways. And I was like, if I just ran into him for 30 seconds, I wouldn't have known. But because just so happened to talk to him for 20 minutes, turns out he was not doing well. So there are a lot of people like that as well that just don't have a plan, don't have the money saved, don't necessarily have qualifications that work well in the civilian world, and they fall apart.
Yep.
And, that's also, very upsetting. A lot of them end up just rejoining and being even more jaded and even worse. But there's definitely the flip side. So I was lucky.
Absolutely. Like, so I haven't shared this full story on the podcast, but I guess, I lost my job. I was basically, so from what happened was my workplace decided they wanted to mandate the vaccine, which is fine. Like, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. But I said to them, look, I think you should reconsider because at the end of the day, it's not mandated for our industry yet, but it should still be a person's choice, irrespective of, whether you believe in it or not. And I'm not advocating either way. All I'm saying is that you should be able to have a choice. And that unfortunately didn't pan out for me. And so long story short, they sort of, the first thing that happened was they said, look, for this month, we don't need you to work. And I'm like, okay, but I've been working from home for the last, 6 weeks or whatever. Who's going to handle my meetings? And I was like, okay, well, send us your meetings and we'll handle those. So I sent them my full calendar and I was like, okay, well, guess I'm not working this month. And I guess like that was probably their soft way of trying to freeze me out, testing my resolve to see, okay, now you got no income. What are you going to do? And, and for me, like, as I said, I think it was more about the fact of, you're trying to force something down my throat that I didn't like. And so I was like, well, like personally, I was actually wanting to wait for Novavax. That's what I had already explained to them. And anyway, long story short, then at the end of October, then they said to me, look, Johnny, we're going to make you redundant. Didn't even enter the conversation anymore. And, so I was, initially I was pretty angry, right? Like, so, especially because it was sort of sprung on me, and I just said, look, I don't want to say anything that is going to offend you guys right now. Let's just hang up the phone and let me process all my emotions, and I'll come back to you in a week.
Wow. I'm impressed that you were able to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so look, I did a lot of thinking about it. I was obviously very angry at the start, and I started to think about, okay, let me put myself in their shoes. If I had this group of companies, and look, I was the most senior person in that BMW business, as the dealer principal there. And I was like, okay, well, if I was in their shoes and I've got, say 400 employees in my group, and I need to think about, what is the right thing. And there's all this societal pressure and all this political pressure, or whatever, mainstream media pressure, whatever you want to call it. There's all this pressure on to basically say we should do this. And so then I thought, okay, well, I don't necessarily blame them. Like, I'm not angry at them. And I guess, so what that started for me was a bit of a journey where I was like, okay, I now need to think about, well, what am I going to do next? Right? I wouldn't say I had a plan per se, right? Like, so when it all started unfolding, and so when the initial conversation started happening, I was really, I did a lot of research, and I did my own homework. And again, I'm not advocating for anything. It's up to them. But the point is, you should have a choice. And so I started to look into, all the political aspects of it and all that sort of stuff. And, it was weird because I wouldn't say it was weird. I sort of just, was like, okay, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for a couple of different things, and we'll see what happens as a result of it. And so one of it was actually a move into politics.
I saw that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I guess it's been announced now, so that's the reason why I'm able to talk about it, because I didn't really want to talk about it before. And I don't want to make this political, right? But I thought it was worthwhile to share the story because we're talking about exiting one industry and trying to move into a different life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I originally did it was like I actually looked into all the major political parties, and I was looking at, I wanted to understand whose values aligned with mine, because I think it's really important, and I think, when we think about politics, everybody, like a lot of the time, a lot of people will say, look, I don't really care. My vote doesn't mean anything, whatever. But I was really thinking about, I've had such a great opportunity in this country to build this beautiful career for the last 17 years that all I want really is for my kids to have the same. Right. And I really was thinking about my kids from that perspective. And so I started to look into all the major political parties, and, there's different reasons why, I didn't like what some people said, I guess if you look into the Greens and they talk about equality and those sorts of things, but there's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Yeah. Right. If 100% agree. If the equality of outcome is the same and you want everybody to be the same, there is no individualism anymore.
Equality of outcome is never a good solution.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know some people talk about that topic and say equality of outcome, but how are you going to achieve that?
Yeah.
What tyranny are you going to put in place
to achieve that achieve that goal?
Yeah.
And then I looked at, I looked into labor, and look, for most migrants, when they get told, so my parents are obviously migrants, they get, you get told when you come to the country, vote for Labor because they're the ones that let people in, right? So, back when the whole, turn the boats around fiasco and all that stuff with the Liberal governments and things like that. Yeah. So that's how they were educated. But then, you start to, I look into the policies and, and I'll give you an example, and I know you don't have kids, but this is, I always find this an interesting point, right? That why do they subsidize childcare rather than, if the idea was that they wanted you to have kids, they should just give the parents the money to do whatever they want with it. Whether you want to send your kid to childcare or you want to use that money to buy food and put it on the table for your kids, it should be your discretion what to do with it. But the logic behind subsidizing childcare is because if you subsidize childcare, that means that both parents can work. And if both parents can work, you can now tax the mother and the father. Right? Whereas if the mum stays at home and instead that $250, they use that for whether it's for other, extracurricular activity or food or things like that.
It's not taxable.
And that mum, or even if the dad's a stay-at-home dad, it's not taxable, right? So I didn't like that. That was just one of the things that I thought about that didn't really align with my values. And then I looked into the Liberal Party, and I was a traditional Liberal Party voter for majority of my life being in business. And then, I really actually got very angry at one point, because if you read the Liberal Party values, if you Google the Liberal Party values and you go to their website, it essentially says, we believe in a government that minimises its interference with the lives of its daily citizens. And what we've had over the last couple of years has definitely not been that. Right?
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And feel free to fact check me, Google it if you like, but it's there. And it's there in black and white writing. And it's like, okay, so if this party espouses these values, yet
it's only when it suits them.
But it's only when it suits them.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really align with that either. Because on paper, those values would be my values. I agree with that. I think it's really important that the government's purpose isn't to burden the lives of its citizens. You want a prosperous country, you want a good country. And then then I started looking to the United Australia Party, and that's where I ended up, right? And so when I actually put my hat in the ring, I was actually thinking, look, nothing's going to come of this. Like, I just signed up as a member, and then they said they were calling for candidates, and I thought, okay, you know what, I'm gonna do it anyway, because who knows what's going to happen with my workplace. And then lo and behold, I end up losing my job. And so, that was at the start of November. And then I was like, okay, well, at the end of the day, I was thinking that I wasn't going to be able to go back to work until December 1 or December 15 anyway. So I'll just sit and wait, and we'll see what happens. And then after all that, I get a call from Clive Palmer saying, hey, we want you on the Senate ticket. And I'm like, okay, well, what does this mean? And I'm still trying to work it all out myself. But, it was one of those things that, it wasn't a planned thing. Like, I never really planned for it. But at the same time, when one door closes, whether it's the window opens or another door opens, like, this other door has opened. And I feel like, just thinking about your story, like for you were thinking about what you wanted, what your exit plan was going to be. For the other guy, he hadn't put much thought into that, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, the opportunities haven't materialized. And look, the reality is like, I'll probably still likely be unemployed, by the time this election is over, unless a lot of people vote for me. But that's okay. I feel like having gone through the experience and having tried is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Irrespective of outcome. I always boil it back down to, I think it's really important that we should be able to talk about what are the values that make this country great, right? And I think, because when I'm listening to you talk about the Defence Force, that we have like this culture of burning people out to get to the upper echelons of the military or the Defence Force, that's not a sustainable culture if we have pride in our military, right? If we're losing guys that are meant to be superstars, what does that mean of who is left, right? And yes, I'm not saying anything bad about them, but I'm just saying, like, the ones that can tough it out, or they grit their teeth and they suck it up. But is that who you want to be there? Don't you want the person who is engaged and wants to be there and wants to make a difference, versus the person who just thought, oh, well, I'll just sit here and bide my time, because it's a matter of time, and like, the compatriot beside you, you're taking on 80% of the burden, they're getting away with the 20% until you've decided to pull the pin. And then, they fly somebody else in, and the next person takes over, and you're a number.
It's rinse and repeat.
It's rinse and repeat.
I knew a lot and know of a lot of people in all aspects of defense, but I can speak to Navy specifically, that they're at the point where in their mind, it's too late for them to leave. Like, they're still like in their 40s or whatever. They have plenty of time for a whole career outside. But in their mind, they're like, why would I leave? Like, I'm comfortable here. What would I do? Why would I, it's almost institutionalized at that point.
Yeah.
And they do, a lot of them, not all of them, some of them are brilliant, but some of them aren't. And they do the minimum because they know they can never be kicked out.
Yeah.
Because the beauty of it is in there for them is you cannot be kicked out. So long as you do the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And you're ticking the boxes required. Yeah, you might get a couple inferior reporting.
Yeah.
But if you don't care about promotion, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You can't be kicked out.
Isn't that crazy? Right? Like it's almost like a very low metric. It's not even the metric of, are you happy? Right? Like, I would have thought that should be if you ask any child what is the most important thing, they'd probably say, you know, they want to be happy, you know, or have love, or those sorts of things, right? Like it's those kinds of values as opposed to security or, you know, income and those sorts of things, right? Like, you know, I think it sort of shakes up your world, and especially, you know, it's different because you've made a conscious choice that, hey, I'm not happy here. I need to make this decision, and you've taken it into your own hands, which is great, right? And for other people, maybe it's like you got to find where those avenues of happiness are. But knowing that you're not happy should be enough for you to want to actually explore that, shouldn't it?
It should. I totally agree. But it requires a lot of courage. And let's take your situation. That you're approaching into something that I'm assuming you've never done before. This is a new adventure for you. That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Not many people, particularly in such a structured, organized, show up at this time, wear this uniform, get paid this amount in your bank account every second Thursday.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
You just do what you're told.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage and a lot of effort to do anything outside of that. And even for your situation, it takes a lot of courage to do something, to step into the unknown. That's what it is. It's to step into the unknown. When you're in the defense, the civilian world is the outside. It is very much the outside. Like you know, people in the civilian world, they need to go get a lease to rent a place. In defense, they give you one. You know, you need to go find a job. Well, in defense, you already have one. You need to figure out all of these things like health insurance and where I'm going to live. What am I going to do? The defense tells you where to live.
Yep.
You have free health insurance. You have free healthcare, like for anything that you would ever need.
Yep.
And there's all these little things that add up in these people's minds as big things. It's so much easier to be a citizen in the defense force than to be your own citizen outside of the defense force.
It's like the golden handcuffs, you know, in corporate world, you get to these high level positions and you've got the golden handcuffs because you've got this lifestyle that that it's supporting.
Right? The golden handcuff. Okay. Yeah.
So to get out of that, you know, you basically, you know, got to give up a lot unless you're not living that exorbitant. And for me, I was never really living in an exorbitant lifestyle. Like I've always been I'm not really a material possessions kind of guy. Like as long as I can train as many times as I can a week, that's what I really enjoy, right? Like I enjoy the discipline. And I think, you know, a lot of the guys who probably enjoy the defense force probably take away that as the biggest aspect, is having that discipline. That allows you to achieve things because it's aggregated gains, you know. You might not see the outcomes of training, you know, your 5 times a week this week, but in 10 weeks, you're probably going to see quite a big change, or in 8 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And then over the course of your life, like that's a lot of learning that you can aggregate. And I feel like just a lot of people get stuck into not realizing how transferable those skills are. You know, you learn a lot of skills where in any industry that you could apply to another industry, right? So, you know, like speaking on that, right? Like, so when you've gone out and now you decided, okay, you're going to get into PTing, you're going to get into talking about nutrition, you're going to get into videography, right? How, like, I'm sure there's probably been some skills that have transferred across for you, right?
Oh, definitely. With organization, because in my position in the Navy, I'd spent like the last 4 years being the boss of someone, right? In some sort of like being a manager, but not just a manager, a leader. And with those different positions that I filled, I was also a project manager. No formal training, just here you go, manage these 3 projects, go. You know, so I have a lot of experience managing and project management, leadership, organization, that sort of shit. You know, mid-level management positions, and those are very transferable to life in general. And I'm very organized myself. Like I nerd out in organization and you know read all those books, like Getting Things Done and everything. So you know I'm drawn to that anyway. So it's sort of been compounded. Other skills is speaking in front of people, or like speaking to a client. I don't have any sales training. I don't have any training dealing with clients, but I can be very confident because I've had a lot of experience talking with authority to someone who is superior to me, like by rank, and telling them what to do because in the nature of my positions in a safety capacity, I've had to do that and tell people where to go when they have like an extra half stripe or a full stripe on their shoulder than I do. Like that's something that you've learned to deal with. Or speaking with authority to older people who you do have authority over, and not letting things like age and life experience dictate who has power in that situation. So dealing with people in that capacity has been very good. But one thing that has hurt me is I find it difficult to talk to people in a way that is nice, like not as direct. You know, in because I'm a very direct person, and it's exacerbated with my training. I'm very direct with people, and my communication style can come off as very aggressive and abrupt. Yep. So I deal with in my business, I deal with finance. I deal with delivering project plans. I deal with the planning, the management. My business partner deals with client acquisition and getting them through the door, and then I sell. Then I deliver once he's attained the client, then I deliver okay, this is what we're going to do to achieve your outcome. So that's what I've needed to do, is partner up with someone that has soft skills.
Yep. No, I think so. I would phrase it as, I think transparency is a value. Like I always talk about this as being my core value. I love the word transparency. I love it more than honesty. I love it more than integrity, because there's something different about being transparent versus being honest, right? And the way that I sort of define that is that most times when you're a kid, your parents always tell you, you know, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it, right? And so a lot of people then bite their tongue if they don't want to tell somebody something that might hurt their feelings. Is that really being honest, right? So it is, but it's not, right? So I think there's a difference between honesty and transparency, in the sense that transparency is the ability to be able to say to somebody, hey, look, you know, because of we've done it this way, this has been the outcome, and you know, what we need to be aware of is how do we now adjust our style to get a better outcome, right? And there's a way that you can have those conversations and deliver those conversations and do it well. So as an example, like I used to do mentoring sessions with my staff, right? And, you know, the first time that I did it, everybody's like shitting themselves, because they're always like, they're thinking, oh, this is a performance review. Like, what have I done? You know, they have a really negative association towards it. Because, you know, most times when they're getting done, it's only because somebody's asked for something or they're asking for something, right? Whereas I would do it as a means to then go and say, okay, let's go back to first principles, and let's try and make sure that you understand, what are we trying to achieve as a business, and what are you trying to achieve as an employee, and really like help them to understand, you know, what is the structure, and how do, if they want to have whatever they want in life, how do we build up to those goals, and how do we set those goals, and how do we achieve those goals? Because a lot of people, they shy away from a hard conversation, because it's not nice to have to tell somebody, hey, you're not very good at this specific thing. But the more transparent you can be about that actually garners you extra respect and reputation as a result of it. And people will then listen to you more because they actually appreciate what you say. Of course, if you deliver it like an idiot and you just, right, they're not going to listen either.
Yeah.
Right. So that I like it because there's an art to it. There's an art to being transparent. You know, it doesn't always work, right? Like, it doesn't always work. There are some people that are just going to take it negatively no matter what. But that's where I always go back to, at least I'm grateful that I tried to educate that person. And whatever you want to do with that information, that's completely up to you. But I can at least just share with you from my perspective what I see. I can listen to your perspective and try and understand it from your perspective as well. But that, you know, to me, transparency is the key. The better that you are with being transparent, and I say this in terms of all aspects of life, like, there's nothing that can really come back to bite you or hurt you, because you've already been transparent about it.
You're not hiding anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So so let's talk a little bit about you know, getting into videography and all that sort of stuff. What have you enjoyed about it?
I love the editing process. I really enjoy the creative aspect of editing. I've just been drawn to it, so I get really like niche in the specific details and like the video effects and the animation and putting together the story, even from the pre-production process of like storyboarding a concept, like coming up with the idea and then actually being able to produce your vision. Yep. Like, you have a storyboard and then being able to actually replicate that. Like, for example, like I presented a storyboard recently to a client, said, hey, yep, this is a story for, it was like a 40-second video, like a promotion, hasn't launched yet, so I'm not going to say what it is. But it's like, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this animation to bring this aspect of it, and then blah, 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 blah. And then I was able to actually produce that, you know, and that whole start to finish creation process was really great. Yep. I also enjoy like the gear, like we spoke about at the start. Like, I'm a bit of a gearhead. I know that there's a bit of an issue in the videography community, people focusing too much on the gear and not enough on the skills. I've been guilty of that in the past, but I'm really into gear as well. But yeah, my bread and butter is not necessarily being out in the field and filming, which is great.
Yeah.
But I really like the editing process. I like the intricate details and knowing the software and being able to manipulate the footage. That's my forte. So it works with my partnership with my business partner, Zach. He's very much hands-on guy with a camera out in the field, gets the shots.
Yep.
And I'm very much okay, let me take it from here. Like, let me do the post, let me do the animation.
Yep.
So I'm the animation and post guy, and he's better at, obviously he can do both and I can do both, but he's better at the hands-on and I'm better at the post-production.
Yep.
Yeah.
See, I like the creation aspect. I hate the editing aspect. Not to say I hate it. I've
like
tried
a means to an end.
Yeah, I've tried to set everything up so I can do as little as possible.
Yeah.
Because I'm so time poor. so like, when I was doing my martial arts film studies, like I do it all on my phone. Like I just use iMovie and I just edit it up in iMovie. But like the thing with that is that what takes me the longest is actually just thinking about the concepts and then storyboarding the ideas of how I want to present it. And so, like at the moment I've got so many other things that I'm thinking about that I haven't really done too many of those lately, but I actually really enjoy that because I like to study things that like, a high percentage, that you see certain sequences over and over again in specific matches. And there's sometimes like just a common battleground and you see somebody just knows the sequences a little bit better, or they have a better idea in terms of the direction that they want to take it. And I like exploring those things. But when it comes to like the podcast and things like that, I feel like it's the content over everything else. Like I don't really
content is king.
Yeah, I don't really like to go on. I don't do much editing at all. I just clip up when I hit the button and when I switch it off, and then adjust the audio, and that's about it. But I just feel like because a lot of people are always like Johnny, you should clip this up and clip that up, and have this soundbite, because I'm sure that stuff will help with promotion, but it's
not you. Yeah,
I'm just lazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your priority's in the right spot, because a lot of people that want to start something like a podcast or want to start a video series or produce whatever, they come to us and they don't really have a good idea. They're like, oh, hey, we want some professionally made promotional material.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, cool. What's it for? What's your KPIs? What's this? What's that? And they're like,
they haven't thought about it.
They haven't thought about anything. They just want to spend money.
Yep.
They just want to spend money and get some professional looking stuff because they've seen it on, I don't know, a Toyota ad and it looked cool. Or they saw, I don't know, some other, larger, more successful business do it. So they think that's what they need to do.
Yep.
And what they're lacking is the content. Content, and even Gary Vee, my idol, not so much anymore, but even Gary Vee talks about this, and it has for decades. Like content is king.
Yep.
And it's funny. I actually saw a study on what advertisement for small businesses were performing the best. And the long and the short of it is that the content that actually looked the worst, as in the lowest quality, like I'm talking someone in front of a whiteboard just talking about a concept, perform better, because in today's day and age, because everyone is so focused on quality of the presentation, how good it looks, how the sound design is, how the animation, the quality of the footage, the set, everything, the lighting, and you name it, that people have basically been inadvertently trained to identify what an advertisement looks like and avoid it.
Yep.
So when they see something that disrupts that view, it draws them in. And then if the content is there, then it sells the product.
Yep.
That obviously doesn't always work,
Yep.
but it's just quite interesting. I don't want to oversell that concept because then I'll be out of a job. But I mean, there is a time and place for professionally done produced content. But if the content itself is shit, what's the saying? You can put sprinkles on a shit, but it's still a turd.
Yeah.
It's the same concept in the online social media and any sort of content that you're making space.
Yeah.
It's the same.
But I feel like, a lot of the social media stuff does gravitate towards the easy sort of, what is trending, as opposed to the long form. Like there are people that love, and like I'm one of those guys. You're obviously one of those guys listening to those kinds of podcasts where we love the long form format. But there's a lot of people that don't get into the long form format. They just look at the clips that
they want 15-second bites.
Yeah. I don't know how you can operate like that. Like I just feel like there's so much detail that you miss a lot of the nuance if you don't pay attention to what is.
Johnny, I don't think some people out there aren't looking for detail. They're looking for let's take like a book, for example. If we use an analogy that learning from a podcast is like reading a book. Some people, they just want to read an article, like a 1-page, okay, get to the point article. Yeah. Give me everything I need. But what they're missing out on. And even those, you've probably seen those services that summarize books for you, and you can listen to a 10-minute, read the whole book in 10 minutes. I've tried those.
Yep.
They're ineffective. And the reason they're ineffective is because they're missing the detail, like you said.
Yeah.
Like you can't learn everything from a book that should take you, an average reader like 10 hours to read in a 10-minute audio clip that you're listening to on 2 times speed while you're on your way to work.
Yeah.
Like, to think that you're going to get a similar result, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
But what it is giving you is the illusion of progress. And I think that's a big problem with the space of just like self-help and everything like that, and even fitness. And you could draw an analogy to even jiu-jitsu or like those Instagram clips, or like the overwhelming instructionals now. Like, you can draw an analogy to so many different areas, and it's that people don't want to put the work in to get the progress. But there's all these, I don't know, solutions that give you a quick
silver
fix.
bullets.
Silver bullets.
Yep.
But the biggest problem is you think you're making progress.
Yep.
But you need to sit down and read the book. You need to listen to Johnny Yap's podcast.
You need to eat shit on the jiu-jitsu mat.
Yeah,
getting
100%.
your ass handed to you 1,000 times.
100%. But yeah, you're exactly right. And that's very evident with vertical content. And that's where the way the world is going, is because it's the dopamine hit. It's what people want to hear. People want to listen to Gary Vee spout off about something for 15 seconds and think, yeah, I'm making progress.
Yep.
But even people like Gary Vee say, turn me off and go do it. Like, stop listening to this, go do it.
Yep.
But people don't.
Wow. I think that's actually that's a pretty good way to end this. I don't know if you've got any questions for me, or you want to ask me anything, but
man, we covered a lot. Hey,
Yeah.
This is not the direction of the conversation I thought it was going to go, but man, yeah, we covered a lot, and I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much.
All right.
And I want to formally extend. We have to have you on Beyond Jiu-Jitsu podcast if you're keen.
Yeah.
But we have to set that one up. Hopefully, it won't take a year and a half like it did for bloody Jeremy. But
Now we'll get it sorted. So
yeah, 100%.
yeah. All right.
Thanks so much, Johnny.
Thank you.